In class, we had been looking at a group working in the suburbs of Paris, in the suburb of Puteaux, that in 1912 had the biggest show of Cubist-styled works called the Salon of the Golden Section, the Salon de la Section d'Or, in 1912, and had been talking about how this group came to be known as Orphists after Apollinaire's review of the show, where he coined the term Orphism to relate to what to him was an interest in music and sound on one hand, but also in art as a form of transcending the physical world. Both of these things relate directly to the myth of Orpheus. A couple of things that are worth noting here, in particular with Villon's machine shop, is his focus on modern machinery. In the 1910s and 1920s, we're going to see a number of occasions where artists in Europe are in fact fascinated with the machine. Actually in America as well, when we get there. The machine was seen as being truly modern. It had the potential to reshape the world for the better. It could make the modern world a new, marvelous, wonderful place. We saw a similar interest in the machine when we looked at Léger, another member of the Golden Section group, whose abstract paintings resemble devices made from engaged or meshed machine parts. Léger actually said that the machine could purify forms in nature when a machine-based form is made based on nature that is in fact then purified. And it was Léger who's one of the first to call this kind of abstraction purism. Again, it's based on the idea of the machine purifying forms. A quote from Léger: "I try to create a beautiful object with mechanical elements, extracting from it the best part possible." He likened this process to the machine. And as we look at his works, we see machine forms everywhere. Nature becomes machine-like. Here, a streetscape, trees, two human figures, a bull against a series of houses, but everything in nature looks very much like a machine. The trees become like tubes or exhaust pipes. The men and the bull, in fact, like robots. It's a widespread idea around 1920, this interest in robotics. In fact, the word robot was first coined in 1920 by a Czechoslovakian playwright, and the term was based on an old Slavic term for a forced laborer. A robota in Slavic is in fact a forced laborer. So a robot was originally seen as a machine that could take the place of slave labor. This idea that machines are going to make the modern world a much better place. The fact that Léger said that he could make beautiful objects with mechanical elements led him to begin to focus in the 1920s on the female form, making the female form more beautiful through purification by the machine. This idea and Léger's work forms the backbone of what became known as Art Deco after a major exhibition in 1925, when Art Décoratif first officially began. But Léger's style really did form the basis for a lot of 1920s, 1930s Art Deco. Alexander Archipenko moved from Ukraine to Paris in 1908 and joined Léger in the pursuit of this purist aesthetic, where humans and other forms that have been observed become machine-like in their elements. The difference between him and Leger, most obviously, is that he's working in 3 dimensions. These are low relief sculptures where the breasts of the woman, for example, or the object in the upper right corner, or parts of the head of the human figure are in fact rendered in 3 dimensions. Archipenko does quite a few of these two, both from the Hirshhorn in local museums, these relief sculptures that make the human form and other forms observed in the world much more robotic. This, again, is part of this purist idea of applying a machine aesthetic, a machine-based sense of form and beauty to the work of art. And it's the sense that anamorphic objects are purified by machinery. If we look at another group who also adopted the term purism, the painter Amédée Ozenfant also adopts this term. And you'll notice that his work in particular shows a strong debt to Cubist objects. We have guitars, we have bottles of wine, we have carafes of water. These are, in fact, very much like some of the objects that we saw Cubist artists dealing with. I turned only here to a local work of art, also in the National Gallery, where we see references to bottles of wine, references to carafes. But you'll notice that Ozenfant ditches the references to the printed word, to printed materials, and focuses only on these purified objects, these Cubist objects that have been, they're sort of anamorphic. On one hand, we talked about the relationship of the guitar to the female body, but at the same time they have been totally purified by mass production, purified by the machine. They're streamlined, and that's really what purism is this interest in these streamlined forms. Ozenfant worked in tandem with Charles-Édouard Jeanneret. They shared a studio together and worked in painting in styles that are difficult to discern from each other, the one on the right up at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But again, you'll notice that Jeanneret, like Ozenfant, has many of the same objects. We have bottles of water, bottles of wine, guitars, and again, a sense of the painter making the form even more machined, even more purified than the original object had been, but taking from the Cubist multiple points of view. So the opening to the bottles, the opening to the carafes, the places where the neck of the wine bottle meets the body, all tipped up and rendered flat on the plane. And each of our artists interested in that quality of glass that allows us to see its surface, but at the same time to see through it. And with Ozenfant in particular, you see this in the shadow on the wall on the left, that Cubist interest in refractions and reflections that we saw there, but again, applied to this new purist aesthetic. Ozenfant and Jeanneret together wrote a book called After Cubism, Après le Cubisme, in 1918, suggesting where Cubism should go next, talking, sort of assessing what it had done so far and where it should go next. And this is what they say, is that Cubism needs to move in the direction of these purified objects, objects that the machine industry have rendered more perfect than nature itself. This is very much strongly influenced by advances in technology. In particular, what we now call Fordism, the idea of industry making forms that are so perfect, so uniform, so streamlined, that they can indeed be mass-produced. And so the chassis of every automobile will fit on its frame, and every one of the steering wheels, and every one of the rolling wheels, and every part of the body, and every radiator looks exactly the same. because the machine has been applied. The human hand simply can't do that, make things exactly the same, but the machine can. That is its great benefit. That's its great strength. Now, Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, while being a painter who worked with Ozonfont, is also best remembered as an architect, where he used the stage name Le Corbusier, and was in fact one of the most important architects of the 20th century. And you can see here, as we look at one of his most famous buildings, the Villa Savoye, just outside Paris, in the suburbs, that in fact here he's also using this same idea of machine purified forms. The columns down below that support the main body of the building are derived from Greek columns, but they're simplified, they're purified into these simple thin columnar tubes. On top of the building, here's a model of it. You can see this enclosed garden with a view out to the landscape that looks very much as if it were derived from the guitar shapes, these purist objects that appear in his paintings and in Ozonfont's paintings. There's really is a direct connection between the two. Corbusier talked about these objects as being object types, things that could be applied to multiple design projects because they had been made into a type. If we think about the word type, typewriter, one thing is struck from a single matrix again and again and again, and everywhere the same. Object types, he called them, that can be redeployed in different projects because they have been rendered so perfect, purified by the machine. A couple views of the Villa Savoye, and you can see that in many ways his arrangement of forms is in fact very much indebted to his purist paintings. It's almost as if the ramps become elements that have been deployed in the background. Even the furniture that he designed looked very much like the forms that we saw in his purist paintings. The ramp leading up to the roof and part of that enclosed garden up above, they begin to look like these purist still lifes that he and Jeanneret were painting. Even on the inside, the spiral staircase that works its way all the way through the building. You can see it through the glass on the right as well. And it extends down to the ground level where cars pull up underneath the building to drop off passengers. All of these have that same sense of purist forms, quasi-guitar-like shapes that have been smoothed and streamlined and perfected by the machine.